On March 7, 1945, something happened along the Rhine River that no soldier on either side expected. A steel bridge, scarred by months of bombing, shaking from distant gunfire, stayed standing when every expert had sworn it would fall. And the mystery that still follows this moment is simple. How did one single bridge change the speed of an entire world war? And why did it survive when it was supposed to be gone? Some called it luck. Others called it a mistake. A few believed it was something close to fate. But the truth sits inside the lives of the men who reached the bridge first, the men who tried to destroy it, and the people who were changed forever by the final desperate weeks of the war. Their choices, fears, and small moments of hesitation shaped the battle we now remember as the Battle of Remagen, the crossing that helped push the war in Europe toward its end. Before the bridge came into sight, before the smoke rose over the river, each person involved carried a lifetime of memories that quietly prepared them for the moment. And to understand why Remagen mattered so deeply, we must step into their stories, one by one, following the path that led them to the riverbank on that strange March afternoon. It begins with an American officer whose calm voice and quick decisions helped turn a chaotic scene into a historic victory. His name was Lieutenant Carl Timmerman. Carl Timmerman was born in 1922 in Nebraska. His childhood was shaped by wide fields, long summers, and a father who had once served as a soldier in the German army during the First World War. Carl grew up hearing stories of muddy trenches, freezing nights, and soldiers who marched not knowing if the next morning would come. His father did not speak about glory, he spoke about survival, and those early lessons stayed inside Carl like steady echoes. When Carl was still a boy, America was recovering from the Great Depression. His family, like many others, worked hard simply to get by. He learned to stay patient, to stay focused, and to keep moving forward even when the world felt heavy. These quiet lessons, hidden inside ordinary days, would later guide him on the edge of the Rhine. When Carl joined the U.S. Army during World War II, he carried his father's memories with him. He trained as an infantry soldier and was eventually assigned to the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, part of the 9th Armored Division. He fought through France and Belgium, moving constantly across dangerous ground, sleeping in frozen fields, and watching friends fall beside him. By early 1945, he had already seen enough to recognize the thin line between life and loss. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, Carl became the first American officer to lead troops toward a place called Remagen, where the Ludendorff Bridge crossed the Rhine River. Soldiers expected every bridge to be destroyed before they arrived, blown apart by retreating German engineers. But as Carl's men moved through the smoke and rubble on March 7th, they saw something unbelievable. The Ludendorff Bridge was damaged, but it was still standing. Carl did not have time to wonder why. He only had time to act. Shells burst around the riverbank as he led his men forward under heavy fire. The wooden planks shook beneath their boots. The steel arches groaned from earlier explosions. Mines and traps had been set all over the bridge, but many charges had failed to detonate. In the middle of chaos, Timmerman remained calm. He ordered engineers to cut wires and clear explosives, while his men pushed steadily across. Every step carried the fear that the next blast could drop the entire structure into the river below. But the bridge held. Carl reached the far side and established a small but critical bridgehead. For the first time in the war, American troops crossed the Rhine over an intact bridge. This moment, quiet, dangerous, and filled with tension, helped accelerate the Allied advance into the heart of Germany. After the war, Carl continued his service, but the stress of frontline combat had marked his health. He died young, at the age of only 29. His story remained tied forever to the Ludendorff Bridge, the place where he made one of the war's most important decisions. While Carl Timmerman and his men were moving forward,
Another man was standing inside a cold tunnel near the other side of the bridge, holding responsibility for making sure it did not fall into American hands. His name was Major Hans Scheller, a German officer sent to Remagen at a moment when the German army was struggling to hold its ground. Hans Scheller was born in the early years of the 20th century, raised in a nation still recovering from the shock of World War I. As a boy, he watched the world around him shift through political turmoil and economic hardship. His education was strict. His home life was shaped by rules, structure, and expectations. When he entered the German army as a young man, he carried with him a belief in order and discipline. During World War II, Scheller served in several administrative and engineering roles. He was not a frontline officer. He was not trained to command large forces in combat. But in March 1945, Germany was collapsing. Many officers were dead, missing, or cut off. Orders became scattered and confusing. And in the middle of that confusion, Hans Scheller was unexpectedly placed in command of the defenses around the Ludendorff Bridge. His assignment carried heavy responsibility. He was told to hold Remagen as long as possible and to destroy the bridge before American troops could seize it. But when Scheller arrived, the situation was already out of control. The town had been bombed repeatedly. Communications were unreliable. A mix of exhausted soldiers, young recruits, and frightened citizens moved through the streets. Scheller found the charges that had been placed on the bridge were poorly arranged, partly damaged, or missing essential parts. Still, he tried to carry out his orders. Working with German engineers, he set new explosives and prepared the final detonation. When American tanks appeared on the hills above town, Scheller gave the signal. A huge blast shook the river valley. Smoke poured across the steel structure. It seemed impossible that anything could survive the explosion. But as the smoke cleared, Scheller saw that the Ludendorff Bridge remained standing. The charges had failed to collapse it. Not knowing why must have been a moment of shock he carried silently. Minutes later, American troops began to storm the bridge. After the capture of Remagen, Hans Scheller was arrested by his own side. He and other German officers were blamed for the failure to destroy the bridge. They faced a quick military trial, and Scheller, still believing he had done everything possible with the little time and resources he had, was executed in the final weeks of the war. His story, often overshadowed by the larger events around him, reveals the pressure and fear inside a collapsing army, where even loyal officers faced impossible decisions with fatal consequences. Another man whose fate became intertwined with Remagen was Sergeant Alexander Drabick, the American soldier often called the first infantryman to fully cross the bridge under fire. He was born in Toledo, Ohio in 1910, the son of Polish immigrants who had come to the United States seeking better opportunities. Alexander grew up working hard, first on farms, then in small local jobs, learning to move quietly through difficult times with a simple determination to never quit.
Before the war, he worked as a butcher, waking up before dawn to lift heavy crates and prepare meat for customers. The job was demanding, but it strengthened his body and gave him the calm confidence of someone used to long physical labor. When he joined the U.S. Army, he brought with him a quiet toughness. During the war, Drabick fought across Europe, facing bitter cold, muddy fields, and sleepless nights. By the time his unit neared Remagen, he had already learned how to run under machine gun fire, how to stay calm during artillery attacks, and how to keep moving even when everything around him shook with danger. On March 7, when American forces rushed toward the Ludendorff Bridge, Drabick was among the first wave. As the air filled with smoke and dust, he sprinted across the long wooden planks, weaving between explosions, shouting encouragement to the men behind him. He later recalled the bridge, shaking as if it might snap in half at any second, but he kept running until he reached the far side and dropped into cover. That crossing became a defining moment in his life. After the war, Drabick returned home quietly, never seeking fame. He went back to work, lived a modest life, and raised his family. Stories about the Battle of Remagen would occasionally draw attention to him, but he remained humble, speaking simply of doing his duty. In 1993, he passed away at the age of 82, leaving behind a legacy tied forever to the fast, dangerous sprint across a bridge that helped speed the war's end. On the German side, another figure played a critical role behind the scenes: Captain Willy Bratke, the officer responsible for the military district that included the Ludendorff Bridge. Bratke was born in 1893, old enough to have served during World War I. His early years were shaped by the shifting borders and political uncertainty of the late German Empire. After the First World War, he watched the Weimar Republic struggle, and like many career soldiers, he continued serving through the changes that eventually brought Germany into the Second World War. By 1945, Bratke commanded a unit formed from older soldiers and local forces. He oversaw the area around Remagen during constant air raids and daily destruction. When the Americans approached the town, Bratke tried to coordinate the defense with limited manpower, scattered communication, and crumbling morale. When the bridge fell into American hands, he was captured. Unlike Scheller, Bratke survived the war. Taken prisoner, he spent time in Allied camps before returning home. In later years, he occasionally spoke about the chaos of those final months, how confusion, fear, and failing supplies made normal military decisions nearly impossible. He lived quietly after the war, passing away in 1982, an old man whose memories held the final echoes of a battle that had once shaken his world. Another person whose life changed with the fall of the bridge was General John W. Leonard, commander of the American 9th Armored Division. Born in 1890 in Indiana, Leonard grew up during a time when America was expanding westward and the world was beginning to modernize rapidly. His upbringing was shaped by discipline and education, which led him into the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. As a young officer, he served during World War I, learning early about the difficult balance between risk and responsibility. During World War II, Leonard commanded armored forces across Europe. His decisions required steady judgment, especially when dealing with fast-moving front lines. When reports reached him that the Ludendorff Bridge was still intact, he made the bold choice to rush troops across instead of waiting. That decision, made quickly but built on a lifetime of training, helped establish a strong foothold east of the Rhine. After the war, Leonard continued to serve until retirement. He never claimed the spotlight for Remagen, but historians later recognized how critical his fast decision was. He lived until 1975, carrying with him the memory of a bridge that unexpectedly changed the course of the war. One of the most unique stories connected to the bridge belongs to Lieutenant Hugh Mott, a young American engineer born in 1920 in Kansas City. As a child, he enjoyed building small structures and fixing broken tools. His curiosity for how things worked stayed with him into adulthood. When he joined the Army during the war, he entered the Engineer Corps, where precision, calm thinking, and mechanical understanding were essential. At Remagen, Mott was one of the men who climbed onto the Ludendorff Bridge under fire to cut wires, remove charges, and stop any remaining explosives that could trigger another blast. He moved slowly across the damaged structure, listening for the tension of tripwires and watching for hidden traps. His careful work helped secure the bridge long enough for thousands of American troops to cross. After the war, he returned to civilian life and worked in engineering industries. His story remained known mainly among military engineers who admired the skill and courage he showed on that day. As the battle unfolded, countless soldiers from both sides faced personal moments that would stay with them forever. Some were young men who had never seen combat before. Others were veterans who understood too well what the final weeks of war might bring. And across the river, thousands of German civilians watched from cellars and broken homes, unsure of what the next day would bring. The Ludendorff Bridge itself, built during World War I as a strategic crossing, became a symbol in those final days. Its long steel arches carried the weight not just of soldiers and tanks, but of decisions made far from the battlefield. Every shaking step across it, every explosion that hit its beams, and every hour it remained standing shaped the pace of the Allied advance.
For 10 days after the Americans crossed, engineers worked to strengthen the weakened structure. But the bridge had suffered too much. On March 17, 1945, without warning, it finally collapsed into the Rhine, taking several soldiers with it. Even in its final moment, the bridge reminded the world that victory often comes with quiet costs. After the fall of Remagen, the war in Europe moved fast toward its end. American forces pushed deeper into Germany. Towns surrendered, prison camps were liberated, civilians emerged from hiding, and in the minds of the soldiers who had crossed the bridge, the memory of that steel structure remained sharp, an image of danger, hope, and uncertainty. In the years after the war, survivors on both sides returned home and tried to build new lives. Some carried invisible memories. Some stayed in touch with the men they had fought beside. Others spoke very little about those days. The bridge itself was never rebuilt. The remaining towers became quiet reminders of a moment when history turned faster than anyone expected. The Battle of Remagen was not the largest battle of the war, nor the longest, but it was a battle defined by timing, by decisions made in seconds, and by failures and successes that shaped everything that followed. It was a moment when a single structure, damaged, trembling, and marked by war, held the weight of thousands of lives and the hopes of nations desperate to see the fighting end. When we look back at March 7, 1945, the mystery remains. Was the survival of the bridge a matter of chance? Was it human error, or something like destiny? The answer lies scattered across the stories of the men who stood on either side of the Rhine. Their memories, their choices, and their quiet moments of fear and courage built the truth behind the event at Remagen. And as their stories remind us, history often changes not with the loudest explosions, but with the unexpected things that manage to stay standing. This has been the story of the Battle of Remagen.